You know, if you're in the business of leading people, the question really becomes, are you coaching their performance or are you trying to manage them to perform? You know, ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to perform on the baseball diamond. I played t-ball when the tee was even higher than me. Ultimately got into slow pitch, and I would take my bike and I'd ride to the local elementary school, taking a piece of tape and making the strike zone on the wall of the school, and I would throw pitch after pitch after pitch. This is when the street lights would come on, yet your parents would still allow you to be out there. And I would continue to throw and threw thousands and thousands of balls because ultimately I wanted to be on a field like this and being the pitcher. Well, unfortunately, I didn't get my chance right away. 7th grade, fast pitch. I asked the coach, "Coach, let me play. I want to pitch. This is what I was born to do." But unfortunately at the time, he didn't think I was good enough. But he said, "I'll tell you what, Steve, continue to pitch for the practice team. You can pitch during practice so we can save the arm of our number one pitcher, of our starting pitcher." I said, "That's fine, let's do that." And continued to pitch and throw and always focused on getting better today than I was the day before. And then imagine this, picture this. There's probably 20 people watching the game. The coach comes up to me and he says, "Steve, are you ready?" I said, "Coach, sure, but am I ready for what?" He says, "You're pitching today. You're going to be our starting pitcher." So with a little bit of excitement, but with a lot of nervousness, I went out up onto the diamond, took a look around and thought, I finally achieved what I wanted to achieve. This is my opportunity to start pitching. And I get ready and I threw ball number 1 and it was a ball. It was outside the strike zone. Pitch number 2, it was a ball again. And this continued. Ball number 3, ball number 4. I walked the first batter. Pretty disappointed at this particular point. Batter number 2 comes up. Ball number 1, ball number 2, ball number 4, and ultimately walked the second batter. Of course, the coach at this point needs to stop, make sure that I should be the one pitching, calls a timeout and comes up to the mound, and we're talking at the mound, and he says, "Steve, I've got a question for you." And I said, "Yes, coach." He says, "Are you done throwing balls?" And I thought, "Yes, coach." And he says, "Are you ready to play like you did yesterday in practice and to be better today than you were yesterday?" I says, "Yep, coach, I am." He says, "Steve, is there anything in your way?" I said, "No, coach, there's not." And he walked away. Next batter comes up, throw another pitch, it's still a ball. Next pitch, strike. Strike 2, strike 3, batter is out. Next batter comes up, ball 1, strike 2, strike 1, strike 2, strike 3, batter's out. 3 batters in a row, I was able to strike out because the coach, his job was to ultimately remove what was in front of me of not being able to use my skill. By the end of my 7th grade, I was pitching 65 miles an hour, 62 to 65 miles an hour. And in 8th grade, ultimately was pitching 75, 76, even 77 miles an hour on a fluke. I began to get better and better and better. So eventually, school was over and high school became next. I had to leave my coach in order to join a new school, a new coach, and ultimately a new team. Began to practice with the team and things were going pretty well. First game comes along, I was able to pitch the second half of the game, but ultimately I didn't feel like I belonged at that particular point. And about a third of the way through the season, I walked up and I quit. What I realized is I no longer had the motivation or the inspiration to continue playing in the environment that I was actually in. What was the difference between my grade school coach and ultimately the high school coach? My grade school coach understood that my driver, my inspiration, was about becoming better today than I was yesterday. Now, I'm a pretty competitive person, but ultimately my high school coach was all about crushing the opponent, taking the ability to coach as more disciplinary action and tell me all the things that I was doing wrong, which is part of the game, but ultimately it wasn't getting the best out of me. And what could have been a wonderful career, and I ended up walking away from. Now, how does this play out in the business world? What's the correlation between the lessons I learned on the ball field and ultimately in business? Well, years later, I became an entrepreneur and started to lead people. And I didn't think back necessarily to what I learned from my grade school coach. Unfortunately, I think I probably gravitated more towards what I learned from my high school coach. And one of the first people that I hired, a sales rep who was struggling initially, who's still with us today, I took a different view of coaching. And in every one of those situations, it seemed like I was providing discipline as opposed to actually providing coaching. And quickly realized, unfortunately not quick enough sometimes, that there's a difference between coaching and disciplinary action. And ultimately created an environment where coaching sessions were viewed as nothing more than disciplinary action. And people got scared of the actual coaching sessions in the workplace. So I thought, okay, it's time to shift this. And I've seen so many leaders that look at coaching primarily as disciplinary action. The second time I sat down with this same particular individual, I thought, okay, coaching is all about training. Let me train him how to do the job that I need him to ultimately do. So all of our sessions together became education and training. But what I ended up realizing is that coaching and training, although they are similar, they're not exactly the same. Training is giving him the knowledge to do the job which he ultimately already had. Coaching is about removing the obstacles that were in his way to actually do the job. And I hadn't thought about it at that particular point. Later on in my career, I started to look at coaching a little bit differently, and I began to mix this idea of coaching and managing, which I see people do all the time. Managing is about getting somebody to do the job, to fulfill the requirements of the job. Coaching, if I think back to my elementary school days, my middle school days, it's about getting somebody to be the best person that they are, in the best role that they can be, even if it means changing the role that they're actually in. It's interesting, the evolution. And ultimately, the final piece was looking at coaching not as disciplinary action. Coaching is not the same as training. Coaching is not the same as managing. Coaching is not about mentoring. There's a big difference between mentoring somebody and coaching somebody. Mentoring them is telling them what to do and giving them your experience and why to actually do it. Coaching is about asking the right questions. Look, mentoring is solving the problem quickly for me. Coaching is asking the questions and benefiting the team and letting the team solve their own problems. So let me go back to my original question. Are you coaching your team's performance, or are you trying to manage your team to perform? The best coaches know one secret ingredient, and that's understanding the drivers of their people. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Coaching is not just about motivating your team. Coaching is understanding the inspiration behind the individual to get them to perform. It's not about forcing them and managing ultimately to perform. I had a coach that allowed me to play on a field like this. As a coach, are you allowing your team to play on their own field?